Every NBA franchise has what-if moments, but for the Charlotte Hornets, June 21st, 2018 wasn't just a what-if. It was a full-blown, what the hell were they thinking? Let's set the scene. It's the 2018 NBA Draft. The Hornets are on the clock with the 11th overall pick. The buzz is strong and the options are wide open. They need someone who can help change their identity of a franchise that's been, floating in basketball purgatory for years now. With the 11th overall pick, they select a 6'6" Canadian guard out of Kentucky, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Within minutes, the Hornets flipped Shai to the Clippers for the 12th pick, Miles Bridges, and 2 second-rounders. That's it. One slot lower and a couple of scratch-off lotto tickets. At the time, this trade barely really made any headlines. It seemed like a mid-mannered draft day maneuver. Charlotte got their athletic wing, the Clippers got a lanky point guard. No big deal, right? Well, this trade turned out to be one of the biggest draft wonders of the decade, undeniably. The Hornets at this time were kinda where they always were. 36 wins and out of the playoffs, drafting in the middle of the first round. This could mean a lot of different things depending on the team drafting, but in the Hornets' case, this was pretty different from normal. They weren't some team that's one piece away, rather a team getting carried by a player in Kemba Walker that was at Shai's own position. What this means really is that Charlotte at this time was in no position to draft for fit, with a star in Kemba that would soon be out of the door anyways. But trading away the best player on the board in return for a bit of a glue guy forward meant that Charlotte chose to do so regardless. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander wasn't the loudest prospect. He wasn't pulling up from 40 like Trae Young or jumping out the gym like Zion would a year later. But if you watched him, you could sense that this was a star in the making. He moved differently. He saw the floor like a veteran. He was smooth, controlled chaos and sneakers. Let's just go back to his college days. Shai wasn't even a starter when the season began in Kentucky, but by the end of the year, he had seized the reins of John Calipari's offense and emerged as the Wildcats' most reliable player, with averages of 14.4 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds, and 1.6 steals, on pretty efficient shooting splits of 48, 40, and 81. More than his numbers, Shai impressed scouts with his poise, size, and feel for the game. He was about as slippery off the dribble as any player I've ever seen, and used change-of-pace moves pretty masterfully. He played with a calm demeanor that screamed he could be a lead point guard. NBA scouts were ecstatic over Shai's elite length and size for a guard at 6'6" with a 6'11" wingspan, shockingly high basketball IQ and decision-making for a young player, but also having insane defensive potential as a switchable perimeter defender. Although scouts loved what they saw, there were of course doubters claiming Shai wasn't an elite athlete or explosive leaper, desperately needed to hit the weights, and just overall didn't have the perfect NBA frame. Still, smart teams saw the upside. The Clippers did, Charlotte, not quite. His rookie year in LA, solid. 10.8 points per game, efficient, calm under pressure, then boom, the Clippers made a huge move. They packaged Shai, Danilo Gallinari, and a mountain of draft picks to get Paul George from the Thunder. Why? Well, to team up PG with Kawhi Leonard, who reportedly wouldn't sign unless they made a deal. So OKC gets Shai, and the NBA world shrugs. Nice player, good potential, and fast forward to 2024, and Shai is a bona fide superstar, better than Paul George ever was in his prime. An All-NBA first-team selection, an MVP finalist, and the engine behind a Thunder team that finishes with the best record in the Western Conference. And in 2025, he gets that MVP he was seeking, all while leading the young Thunder dynasty to their first chip in OKC. The dude Charlotte traded away just had one of the greatest seasons a guard has ever played. And meanwhile, Charlotte is still trying to climb out of the bottom of the league. Oh, and those 2 second-round picks Charlotte got for him, they turned into Vernon Carey Jr. and Scottie Lewis. That's really making up the difference between the league's scoring champ, MVP, and Finals MVP, and a forward who got suspended a year for beating the shit out of the mother of his children. It's like trading in a winning lottery ticket for a coupon at Walmart's. I mean, the Hornets essentially had the ticket out of poverty, then gave it away to the Clippers, who in Clippers fashion also gave that away, as well as 47 draft picks for a bag of chips and some podcast equipment. To be fair, Miles Bridges isn't exactly a bust. He's been one of the most explosive dunkers in the league, had a breakout 2021-2022 season averaging 20 points per game, and looked like a future building block, until he decided to give his girl the 1-2 Mayweather that caused a bunch of shit for the organization, leading him to obviously get suspended and taking a year off from basketball. But Bridges is not a franchise-altering player, and when your return from the MMA was at best pretty good, well, the guy you gave up is putting up 32 points per game, leading a young powerhouse in OKC, and being crowned league MVP, pretty good just doesn't cut it at all. They left OKC with Jalen Williams, Carson Wallace, Chet Holmgren, and more, all while still owning a ridiculous number of future picks. OKC built a championship that's fully capable of becoming a dynasty almost overnight, with Shai as the foundation. Meanwhile, Charlotte's still rebuilding, still fucking ass, honestly, still hanging around the lottery. LaMelo Ball is fun, sure, he may put up scoring totals comparable to Shai, but a player of Shai's productivity level is literally LaMelo Ball's ceiling. All scoring totals aren't equal by any means. Brandon Miller shows promise, but the Hornets don't have an identity, they don't have a leader, they don't have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The Charlotte Hornets trading away Shai might not have made headlines in 2018, but 5 years later it's clear. They gave away a champion, an MVP, a franchise player, a once-in-a-decade leader for a solid role player, and 2 ghost picks. This trade is a masterclass in misjudgment. It's a reminder that sometimes the quietest players become the loudest legends, and that sometimes the worst move is made not out of malice, but out of misreading the moments. But this isn't the only devastating mistake that Charlotte made. If you're watching this right now, there's an 85% chance that you're not subscribed to the channel, so make sure to change that for me. We're trying to hit 100K by the end of the summer, and I appreciate all you boys watching. It was June 26th, 1996, and the NBA world was buzzing. So many talents like Allen Iverson, Stephon Marbury, Ray Allen, and Steve Nash were all entering the league. This damn near could have been the best draft class of all time, and come the end of the lottery, Charlotte had their pick with the best player in the class still on the board. A 17-year-old phenom from Lower Merion High School in Pennsylvania, Kobe Bryant. At the 13th overall pick, the Charlotte Hornets selected Bryant, a little bit of an odd move that seemed out of left field for the franchise. Their motivation lay elsewhere. They wanted a proven, dominant big man. In stepped Vlade Divac, the 7'1" Serbian center, who had been a steady force for the Lakers since 1989. A deal was struck, right then and there, Kobe's rights for Divac's contract. But as quickly as it was made, the trade nearly unraveled. Divac threatened to retire rather than go to Charlotte, which would have voided the deal entirely. He built a life in LA, and trading him for an untested high school kid felt like an insult. Enter Jerry West, the Lakers' legendary GM. He leaned on Divac, his loyalty, and persistence, relentlessly reminding everyone to get this deal done. Divac finally persuaded, boarded the plane. The trade closed, the Lakers got a future legend, and Charlotte, they got a center for what looked like a win-now path. In Charlotte's eyes, this wasn't a bad deal, it was a calculated one. They needed an offensively minded big in an era that seemed to be a necessity in. With scorers like Glenn Rice and Anthony Mason, and shooters like Del Curry, you can pretty honestly justify the fit here. Divac was a reliable scorer, rebound, and passer. They thought Bryant, who again was just a high schooler, wouldn't fit their immediate goals as a wing scorer when that box was very clearly checked already. Then Hornets GM Bob Bass didn't mince words. In a phone call with Kobe, he bluntly said, "It's a good thing we're trading you, because we couldn't have used you anyways." Kobe handled it like a champ. Instead of celebrating, he stormed off to the gym, proving this was personal. Divac, who nearly walked away, eventually understood. He even admitted later that he'd trade himself for Kobe as well. Charlotte's mindset at the time, aim for a playoff bump with a polished center. But in the NBA, the unknown often holds the greatest yield. The Lakers instantly cashed in. They cleared cap space to sign Shaquille O'Neal and secured their future superstar in the meantime. That summer of '96 launched a dynasty with Kobe and Shaq, all beginning with Charlotte's unwilling to roll the dice. They drafted Derek Fisher with the 24th pick. In 1997, they'd add Robert Horry. Soon enough, they were the top team in the West and laid the foundation for their three-peat from 2000 to 2002. The ripple, Kobe became an 18-time All-Star, 5-time NBA champion, 2008 MVP. Divac, a solid but transient contributor in Charlotte, making just a 2-year pit stop with the Hornets before playing his best ball over in Sacramento. Kobe evolved into an NBA icon, a champion, a leader, a mentor. Charlotte's short-term gain looked flashy, but it faded quick. Meanwhile, the Lakers built a generational legacy. Reddit and other forums still buzz to this day about the whole ordeal. He never wanted to play at Charlotte anyway, so everything about it sounds made up and an excuse. Analysts point out, Charlotte was manipulated into selecting Kobe. Teams ahead were dissuaded. The Hornets dribbled into this deal, which was politically and financially messy. Charlotte's gamble, they chose proven talent over raw talent. but sometimes raw becomes the greatest when you have the work ethic to develop it. Kobe was a generational talent hiding in plain sight. In that gamble, a young kid over an established center proved superior. This story reminds front offices, draft night decisions echo for decades. Risk and foresight breed dynasties, caution and short-sightedness rewrite legacies. Now let's fast forward back to the 2018 draft and take a look at the real trade of the night. Luka Doncic was the pretty clear number 1 overall pick this night. I'm not exactly a genius for saying it at this point, but as the best player in the second best league in the world at 17 years old, this was actually a generational prospect that was drafted after DeAndre Ayton, who was just there to get paid, and Marvin Bagley, whose career gives me depression. The 2018 draft was a loaded class from every perspective. There was star talent throughout the early, mid, and late lottery. There was depth all throughout the first round. From before the draft bells rang, this was known to be true, and to this day, this has only been solidified. And with the 3rd pick on the board, the Atlanta Hawks set in a situation to completely alter their franchise's trajectory. Atlanta picked the best player in the class, through the lens of hindsight, and through the lens of majority opinion at the time. There's a lot of high-risk, high-upside European talent that has come through the draft. Luka wasn't that. This guy had dominated grown men in the Euroleagues, and had dominated NBA talent through limited exhibition play. Yet with the upside of a wide range of talent in the draft pool remaining, the Atlanta Hawks felt comfortable acquiring more assets in a 2019 first-rounder for the small cost of falling just 2 draft picks in 2018. With the selection of future All-Star and future 30 and 10 point guard Trae Young, the pick was at least certainly not wasted, but what was given up was a guaranteed opening of a championship window. The Hawks at this time were in full rebuild mode with no piece truly a lock for the future. Outside of John Collins, who showed promise as a rim-running stretch big, there were a lot of shots to go around, and a real playmaker was the number 1 priority. To be fair, Trae Young really did fit this mold. The point guard of the future who can shoot the piss out of the ball, run the pick and roll, and find lob targets or kick out to shooters. In a vacuum, it's not that different to the role that Luka would have ran on this roster. And with Trae Young on the team, the Hawks didn't do the worst job surrounding him with the right kind of talents at one point in time. With shooters on the wing in Bogdanović and Herter, lob threat in Clint Capella, and a pace pusher who can stretch the floor in John Collins, the Hawks had an offense that fit the meta of the NBA, pushing an exciting playoff run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals with a beatdown against the Knicks and a little bit of help from Ben Simmons. The Trae Young Hawks era has certainly died down a bit, but to say it's been a total lost cause isn't true whatsoever. Despite his very glaring defensive shortcomings, the Hawks have done a pretty decent job at least staying competitive by kinda just following the pack. It's a copycat league, and with loads of 3-and-D wings and mobile lob threats like Capella or switchy athletes like Okongwu, the team's not a doom and gloom franchise that cursed their whole future. However, when you look back at the trade that started all of this, it's hard to not wonder what could have been. Luka Doncic in his run with the Mavericks reached an offensive peak comparable to some of the best players in basketball history to start his career. I'm not going to go too into the weeds about it since, of course, we all witnessed the Luka magic over the last 6 years or so, but with a statistical peak around a 34-point triple-double, this was one of the most dominant stretches that basketball's ever seen. The Luka effect was real and clearly visible, from turning lob threats into unguardable weapons come playoff time, and a laundry list of names that turned into three-point marksmen while playing alongside Doncic. The amount that this guy elevated his teammates was ridiculous, especially when considering that a 25-point night from him was an off night. Although the Hawks trade didn't end in true disaster, it's hard to not think about what could have been with Luka on the team, since really, this guy gives you everything Trae Young does, with shot-creating abilities that are so far beyond where Trae could ever reach at his size. With a tenure in Dallas that felt very restricted due to the talent around him being a weird mesh, injured, or just not as talented as other stacked teams in the league, looking at the construction of a team in Atlanta that at a time appeared to be really suited to win in the modern NBA just makes this trade one of the bigger what-ifs in NBA history. History repeats itself, but in the NBA, it repeats with a fadeaway jumper, 7 feet of unguardable skill, and a German accent. Because in 1998, a little-known international prospect named Dirk Nowitzki was passed over, doubted, and yes, traded on draft night. And once again, a franchise had its hand on greatness, only to let it slip through. This time, the Milwaukee Bucks were the culprits, and this time, the player they gave away would change the game, not just for a team, but for an entire generation of big men. Now let's dive into one of the most underappreciated and massively consequential draft day deals in NBA history. The night Dirk Nowitzki was traded away for a tractor. The 1998 NBA draft had a seismic undercurrent that would eventually reshape the league. On June 24th, the Milwaukee Bucks selected 20-year-old German forward Dirk Nowitzki with the 9th overall pick, but Dirk would never don a Bucks uniform. Minutes later, the Bucks shipped his rights along with forward Pat Garrity to the Dallas Mavericks in exchange for the draft rights to center Robert "Tractor" Traylor, whom Dallas had selected 6th overall. On paper, it looked like a pretty fair deal. Milwaukee got a proven college big in Traylor, a 6'8", 280-pound post-up machine with averages of 16 points and 10 rebounds a game at Michigan. That kind of size and rebounding was exactly what the Bucks thought they needed. Dirk, on the other hand, was a skinny international throw-in from Germany, an unknown quantity in an era that undervalued overseas prospects, since at this time, there were really quite a few more busts than hits. This wasn't a spontaneous swap, it was prearranged. Don Nelson, then Mavericks coach and GM, orchestrated the deal in advance to ensure Dallas landed Dirk Nowitzki. The Bucks agreed to reach for Dirk, but only because they thought Dallas would have taken Traylor at number 6 anyways. Milwaukee's scouting director Larry Harris later acknowledged they never had Dirk, attributing the move to limited international scouting. Dallas, tight with Boston, who held number 10, couldn't risk the Celtics grabbing him. As Don Nelson recalled, he wouldn't go past 9. We knew Boston had number 10. We knew if we didn't get ahead of Boston, they were going to take him. They even hid Dirk before the draft, keeping him largely under wraps. At the draft, the arena erupted when Dallas was rumored to be taking Traylor, not Dirk. Fans booed the pick. European fans faced bias. Many figured Dallas had botched it. Then came the swap announcement. Traylor to Milwaukee, Dirk and Garrity to Dallas, who would flip Garrity for Steve Nash. It was Dallas's first masterstroke of draft night, swapping one question mark for 2 budding stars. And yet, nobody realized its gravity. Dirk's rookie year was modest. A lockout-shortened season meant he stayed in Germany a bit longer, easing his body in. When he finally arrived, he scored 8 points per game in 20 minutes. Enough to raise eyebrows, but far from spectacular. Still, Coach Don Nelson persisted, embracing Dirk's perimeter skills, his sweet outside shots, and his basketball intelligence. That old-school Mavericks rebuild, infused with Dirk, Steve Nash, and Michael Finley, became the backbone of a 60-win team in 2003. It all came from that lottery night gamble. Meanwhile, Milwaukee's vision for Traylor never fully materialized. Hampered by weight and conditioning issues, he settled into a modest 5-point, 4-rebound per game role across 7 NBA seasons. He bounced around, eventually becoming a tragic footnote, passing away prematurely in 2011. In contrast, Dirk was just warming up, as emblematic a contrast as the Mavericks franchise could hope for. Dirk blossomed. He redefined his trademark one-legged fadeaway, became a 14-time All-Star, 12-time All-NBA, 2007 MVP, and 2011 Finals MVP. He led Dallas to their only championship in franchise history, toppling the Big Three Heat and redefining the power forward position forever. He ended his career at 31,560 points, being 6th all-time, and spent an entire 21-year career in Dallas, earning legendary respect on and off the floor. For Milwaukee, it's an ongoing reminder of opportunity lost. For Dallas, it's the bedrock of a beloved, unapologetic franchise identity. The Mavericks built on winter nights, fadeaways, and faith, and for the league, it changed how franchises scout, how they bet on talent, and how a single day, a single phone call, and a single feeling can define a future. Dynasties are often made through the draft, or in some cases are extended through it, which was certainly the case in 2011. Now, to give you an idea of what was going on in the league at that time, LeBron just played like total shit in the NBA Finals, while Dirk and Jason Terry sprayed 3 balls. But they were in no way a championship favorite. San Antonio was bounced early in the playoffs, but as we all know, finds ways to stick around as a contender by finding talent in odd places and developing guys that the rest of the league has given up on. And at this time, had a 6th Man of the Year candidate in George Hill that was deemed pretty replaceable, with a clear hole at the small forward slot in Richard Jefferson, who at this point really wasn't matching the timetable or the need of the San Antonio Spurs. Prior to the 2011 draft, it was basically a guarantee that the Pacers' 15th overall selection was whoever the hell the Spurs wanted, because the Pacers had agreed to make George Hill their point guard of the future. Now, this was a tough ask for the Spurs. George Hill was one of Popovich's favorite players. He was a lanky point guard, great at serving as a point of attack defender and funneling shots to Duncan. He could run a pick and roll efficiently while being able to pull up in the mid-range or knock down 3 balls at an average to above average rate. George Hill really had no weaknesses. He could fit on any team and kind of fit the Spurs' unselfish brand like a glove. George Hill was a guarantee. Efficient scoring, good decision-making, above-average defense, and at the time, Indiana started to see their pieces coming together and opted to pull the trigger on their guard of the future. The trade really did make sense for Indiana to some extent, adding point guard depth to a team that already had Darren Collison, who was a bit of a smaller George Hill with a quicker trigger. But all in all, having two well-rounded points to lead a team at all times is a win on any team's books. The Pacers were running through wing scorer and Danny Granger at the time, who would see his downfall shortly after due to lower body injuries, but luckily for Indiana, Paul George had close to surpass Granger by the time his body betrayed him. This left a core of Paul George, George Hill, David West, and Roy Hibbert by the 2013 season, after a pretty stupid dealing of Darren Collison for Ian Mahinmi, but nonetheless, a pretty cohesive unit with a vision that's crystal clear. What Indiana could do was funnel like crazy. George Hill, again as a points of attack defender, could force guards to meet with the rim protector, who for a very brief while was better than Tim Duncan in that regard. David West was a very solid bruiser who could protect the paint as well, and served as an immovable object, while Paul George had blossomed into a legitimate two-way star. With one move, the Pacers did definitely advance their team into the new identity after the pretty weak Danny Granger era, into a Pacers team that was not only defined by defense, but would produce to a level comparable to some of the greatest defensive teams of all time. This was a cohesive unit that had relatively no weak point throughout, and having George Hill as a ball handler and floor general next to Paul George, who could also kill with the ball in his hands, was a good enough offensive engine for the defense to carry them to the top of the Eastern Conference. 2 years after the trade, and this is the team for Miami to beat in the East, with Paul George and of course Lance Stevenson making LeBron's life a living nightmare, and Roy Hibbert anchoring the defense and taking advantage of the Heat's weakness in the post. This Pacers team was the Big Three Heat's best matchup in the East throughout the early 2010s. But sadly, in 6 games in 2012, 7 in 2013, and 6 in 2014, the Pacers were never able to get over the Miami hump. Kind of similar to what we saw this year, the Pacers were just kind of lacking in star power, just making up for it with tight defensive schemes and a trust in each other that elevated their talent level. Paul George certainly provided higher levels of star power compared to the Pacers of today, not a one-to-one comparison, but when matching up with the Heat, even just giving them a run for their money in a 7-game series was considered a great overperformance for an underdog blue-collar team. It really just wasn't meant to be, except when you take into account that the key to their problems was staring them right in the face. Back in 2011, the Pacers traded away the steal of the draft. Although at the time Kawhi Leonard was expected to basically be a Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Kawhi Leonard completely shifted the power structure of the NBA. Kawhi was a replacement to Richard Jefferson, who would be traded away in 2012 on the wing. He was an instant defensive stopper who developed to a defensive peak that may have been the best perimeter defender in basketball history, and also turned into a complete offensive juggernaut compared to only some of the greatest wings that basketball has ever seen. Taking away this trade, the Pacers couldn't be hurt, dude. Yes, George Hill is a very, very solid as can be player, but in this alternative timeline, Darren Collison doesn't get traded away. Why would he? With an all-time defense already, and far and away who would be the best defender in the league, and the best LeBron stopper we've ever seen, the Pacers' chances of beating the Heat skyrocket. I mean, this defense immediately reaches what could be the best in basketball history. PG and Kawhi actually have a successful pairing, and the history of the NBA looks way the hell different. Instead, Popovich found his millionth diamond in the rough. The defensive impact of Kawhi turns out to be a driving force for the Spurs taking down the Heat in 2014. Kawhi's prime reaches an all-time great level by 2016, and had Zaza not been one dirty dog, the greatest team of all time may have fallen at the hands of the Claw as well. This is a tough one, since at the time of the trade, the Pacers really didn't need to make it, and the Spurs really were the ones taking the gamble. But when betting on a raw talent who wants nothing more than to work their ass off, don't be surprised when they shock the world. One of the most infamous draft day robberies in NBA history happened in 1956 when the St. Louis Hawks selected Bill Russell with the 2nd overall pick, only to trade him minutes later to the Boston Celtics. In exchange, the Hawks received Ed Macauley and Cliff Hagan. At the time, Macauley was a fan favorite who had starred at St. Louis University, and Hagan would go on to have a strong NBA career. But what they gave up was arguably the greatest winner that the sport has ever seen. Russell had averaged over 20 points and 20 rebounds at the University of San Francisco, and had led his team to back-to-back NCAA titles. He is widely considered the best player in the draft. The events leading up to the trade are still surrounded by speculation and conspiracy theories. The Rochester Royals held the number 1 pick and passed on Russell. A long-standing rumor claims that Celtics owner Walter Brown, who also owned the Ice Capades, a wildly popular traveling figure skating show, offered to bring the show to Rochester for a full week if the Royals passed on Russell. Celtics coach Red Auerbach publicly repeated that story for decades, though Royals officials have always denied it. Officially, Rochester declined to draft Russell because of his $25,000 salary he demanded and the presence of star center Maurice Stokes already on the roster. As for St. Louis, the decision to trade Russell has been explained by the fact that McAloo is already a local hero, but other reports suggest more complicated reasons. At the time, the Hawks had no black players, and racial tensions in the city were quite high. A YouTube conspiracy video also revived the idea that race may have played a role in the team's decision to trade Russell. That theory gained credibility in 2013 when Bill Simmons interviewed Russell for NBA TV. Russell confirmed that the racial climate in St. Louis was a key factor. St. Louis was overwhelmingly racist, Russell said. If I would have gotten drafted by St. Louis, I wouldn't have been in the NBA. Russell said that Don Barksdale, the first black All-Star, and a Celtics teammate had told him Boston was different, that owner Walter Brown and coach Red Auerbach were really good people. That reputation had already been established in 1950 when Brown famously dismissed concerns about drafting Chuck Cooper, the first black player ever selected in the NBA draft, by saying, "I don't care if he's polka dot, that's the player we drafted." The Celtics would eventually become the first team to start 5 black players in 1964 and win 11 championships in 13 seasons with Russell as their defensive anchor and leader. In the end, the trade was a total disaster for St. Louis. While their pieces did both become Hall of Famers and helped the Hawks win a championship in 1958, they gave away one of the greatest players in the history of the game. Bill Russell redefined defense, leadership, and winning, and if there's any draft day move that qualifies as a historic blunder, whether driven by basketball decisions, financial concerns, or something more uncomfortable, it's definitely this one. Now, it really doesn't feel like it, but back 8 years ago in 2017, we saw a bit of a rarity with the Boston Celtics trading down from the number 1 pick, which was essentially a Markelle Fultz for Jason Tatum swap. Now, this made a bit of sense at the time. Boston wanted Tatum and was willing to draft him regardless. Everyone else wanted Fultz first overall, and the Lakers were alright taking Alonzo if Fultz wasn't available. So moving from 3-1 for the small price of a future pick that didn't end up amounting to much anyways was a small price to pay for the 76ers to get who was thought to be the best player in the draft. Now, the process is basically a meme at this point. These guys maxed out Podcast P in an effort to win a championship and got the 3rd overall pick in the draft this year. They should really be ashamed of themselves, but at this time, Fultz was the right pick, to be honest with you. With comparisons to James Harden, this feels a bit weird, but I think it's worth reminding you that Fultz was a completely different player at one point than what we've seen from him in the NBA. We all know about the shoulder condition that robbed him of his jump shot, but outside of just that, Fultz was a killer offensively with a deep bag of moves to go to, was shifty as all hell, and kind of lastly was also very good at attacking the basket off the bounce or cutting to the basket. He was a bit of a combo guard who could be trusted to run the point effectively, and in what we all saw unravel, turned into the weirdest prospect in NBA history. Due to pain in his shoulder, Fultz was left essentially unable to hoist another jump shot, and was somewhat left trying to play basketball in a body that he wasn't used to playing in. You can't even hate on this kid, man. Due to a freak injury, mental issues, and some other injury flare-ups here and there, this guy was a James Harden forced to play like a John Morant. Despite being this shifty shot creator type of player his whole life, all that was seemingly left of him just a few years into his career was his ability to score at the basket. At this point, Markelle Fultz is hanging on to the league by a thread, and what Philadelphia gave up for this guy is the last thing you want to see. Jason Tatum, of course, would blossom into the corniest yet most versatile forward in the NBA. I mean, with scoring averages in the high 20s to low 30s, a complete 3-level scoring repertoire, with a bag of moves to create his own shot, and silently being one of the best passers at his position ever, along with pretty elite defensive versatility. I mean, the guy's a cheeseball at times when he's rocking the full Kobe fits and trying to clip farm after winning a championship, but he's undeniably a great piece to build around in the NBA today that directly led to a championship for the franchise. I'd like to believe there's an alternate timeline out there that Markelle came into the league and seriously stepped up, But from where these two teams started up to the 2024 NBA Finals, I couldn't think of a worse outcome for the 76ers, man. The Seattle Supersonics entered the 1987 draft with momentum. After a 39-43 regular season, they shocked the league by upsetting both Dallas and Houston in the playoffs, advancing to the Western Conference Finals before being swept by the Showtime Lakers. Still, the future looked bright. Seattle had a high-scoring trio in Dale Ellis, Tom Chambers, and Xavier McDaniels, each averaging over 23 points per game, and a promising young point guard in Nate McMillan, who had just led all rookies in assists. What the Sonics lacked was size and defense up front, critical needs in a Western Conference that featured two dominant big men in Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Hakeem Olajuwon. With 2 first-round picks, including the number 5 pick acquired by the Knicks, GM Bob Whitsitt set out to solve that problem. Rumors circulated before the draft of a possible trade with the Bulls, who were targeting an under-the-radar 6'8" forward from Central Arkansas named Scottie Pippen. If Reggie Williams, a polished Georgetown wing, was available at number 5, the Sonics reportedly planned to keep the pick. But when the Clippers took Williams at number 4, that door opened. Seattle selected Pippen at number 5, but not for themselves. The pick was a part of a prearranged deal. The Sonics sent Pippen to Chicago in exchange for the number 8 pick, used to select center Alden Polynice, a future second-rounder, and the right to swap first-round picks in a future draft. Seattle then used their own pick at number 9 to take Alabama forward Derek McKee. Their assistant coach praised the moves at the time, saying the Sonics had added 2 potentially great big men. On paper it made sense. Polynice was a 6'11" bruiser who had helped lead Virginia to a Final Four and fit the mold of what the Sonics needed. McKee brought defensive versatility and basketball IQ, but in giving up Pippen, Seattle had unknowingly handed away a future Hall of Famer and one of the most important players in NBA history. Alden in reality was a fine player, but just that. By the time that Seattle was a real contender in the mid-1990s, Alden wasn't a part of the team and was really a forgettable piece of basketball history, passed around the league throughout the next 15 years, averaging under 10 points per game. Pippen, on the other hand, of course, made an immediate impact in Chicago, becoming the ideal running mate for Michael Jordan. Together, they forced the league's most feared dynasty in basketball history. The Bulls won 6 championships between 1991 and 1998, with Pippen making 7 All-Star teams, 10 All-Defensive teams, and may have very well been the best player in the NBA for a brief while, behind only Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon. Meanwhile, Polynice spent 3 uneven seasons in Seattle before being traded to the Clippers. McKee was a solid starter, but never an all-star with the Sonics. The other pieces of the deal resulted in minor role players like Sedale Threats and Brad Sellers. And though Seattle did end up with Shawn Kemp and Gary Payton through later trades and draft picks, if you stick Scottie Pippen onto that team, it's hard to say they'd be much less than a lock for an NBA championship. The irony came full circle in 1996, with Kemp and Payton at their peak. The Sonics finally reached the NBA Finals, only to run into the Bulls, led by Michael Jordan, and the very player Seattle once drafted and traded away, as Chicago defeated the Sonics in 6 games. Seattle had built a contender, Chicago had built a dynasty, and it all started out on draft night when the Sonics passed on greatness in pursuit of a quick fix. Thank you for watching. If you made it this far, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and as always, I'll see you boys in the next one. Peace out.